Hey, that was easy. We finished part 1. Now we're going to do part 2, which is shorter. Yay! And there was much rejoicing. All right, let's go see what we have. Oh, wait, let's answer these questions. I'm all in a rush. What happens when the Euro-Americans show up? Oh, yeah, nothing good. See, like back there in part 1, everything was so good. Wasn't that nice? Oh, and then the white people showed up. Let's go see. Disease and the apocalypse. It's a little like 2020, only worse. If you can imagine that. Oh, God, it's a little like 2020. That's funny, you have to admit. Anyway, when Euro-Americans came to the New World, they brought their old world diseases. And the thing about the New World, and by the way, even that language is kind of white supremacist and racist, because the New World isn't new to millions of people who lived here. We call it the New World because it was new to the Euro-Americans or the white people. But it's a continent every bit as old as over in Europe and Africa and Asia. But nonetheless, I don't know what else to call them, so that's what we'll call them. So the old world, Europe, Africa, and Asia, had a lot of more diseases that were mortal. That is, diseases that routinely killed people. Influenza, the plague, smallpox, cholera, etc. Okay? The New World, for reasons that we don't really fully understand, had none of those things. None. There wasn't one disease here so bad that it routinely killed people. At least not before the white people came. Now, I'm not saying nobody ever got sick and died in North or Central or South America before white people, but just that they didn't get sick and die from a bacteria or a virus, because the mortal ones didn't exist in the New World. That's cool, isn't it? So what happens is those people living here are living in some sort of bacteriological and virus-free, let's just go with that, wonderland, until the white people show up covered in germs and viruses, and the stuff spreads like wildfire. Like wildfire. You know how viruses spread when people aren't being careful. Maybe you've heard about it on the news. Oh, yeah. So what happens is the disease comes to the New World, and it really did kill between 75 and 90% of the native people. And when I teach History 1, which is the basic American history class, I do a 30-minute lecture on what that means. But I want you just to think about it for a second. Because we often say this, oh yeah, disease killed the Indians, but then we run off and pretend like they lost because they were inferior, because they're brown. Well, think about what that'd be like. Think about if COVID-19 killed 75 to 90% of Americans. Okay, think about that. Think about that for yourself. If 75 to 90% of the people you knew died, if 75 to 90% of the people in this country died, that would be the end of, 1, your family, 2, your community, wherever you live, 3, it'd be the end of your college career, which is a sub-community. It would be the end of the state of California. It'd be the end of the United States of America. It'd be, quite simply, an apocalypse. An apocalypse, an event that fundamentally changes the world and leaves the world different when the event passes. That's what European diseases did to Native Americans. And you can't point to one moment on the map of time where it happened. What happens is it happens over and over and over again. People back east are exposed at one time. Native people in the Spanish Southwest are exposed at a different time. People in the Pacific Northwest, people in the indigenous people in the Midwest, indigenous people in the Arctic. They're all exposed at different times, and then they're exposed over and over again. So we have is not just a moment. This isn't like The Walking Dead, where the zombie plague comes and boom, and then it's over and now you just have to deal with it. For Native American people, it's an ongoing thing for hundreds of years. Every few decades, some horrifying disease rolls through and kills a bunch of people. And indeed, we know on reservations today, Native people are still super vulnerable to some of the things floating around out there. Most of those things we immunize against because we're smart and we immunize, right? You vaccinate because you're not, stupid. And if you don't vaccinate, go ahead and be insulted. But we can't vaccinate against tuberculosis. So tuberculosis is still rampant on reservations. Native American people are still way more vulnerable to it than not Native American people. Anyway, a lot of talking for this slide. That what happens is that level of disease mortality destabilizes Native American culture fundamentally. And what happened is you take a matriarchal, matrilineal, not property owning, fairly small communities, and you wipe it out with an apocalypse over and over again. Combine that with military attacks by patriarchal societies where men are in charge and women are entirely legally subsumed under men by coverture, and you can imagine that would turn out very, very badly for Native American women. I mean, you may not know the details, but you could just imagine that. You could extrapolate that. And what immediately happens is that Euro-Americans look at Native Americans and say, those people are savages. Everything they do is wrong. They don't control the bitches. The women are running wild. They don't worship the right God. They don't wear the right clothes. They don't wear the right food, eat the right food. And so what happens is Europeans foist on to Native Americans their own patriarchal, monotheistic, androcentric way of life. Now, those are all words we should know. So patriarchal, a society where men have the power, monotheistic, one God, androcentric, male-centered. Yeah? Okay, well, not good for women. Might be good for men. Let's go see. So, for example, let's just take a case study instead of me talking in generalities. And I necessarily have to. This and part one have been really, really general because there are over 2,000 tribal groups in just North America alone. And I couldn't take them one by one and say, this is what this group was like and this is what that group was like. I can't do it for the apocalypse that is Euro-American contact either. So we'll take this one group, the Sioux, and we'll do those. The Sioux, in case you're wondering, this is a Great Plains Indian. They started out in kind of Michigan, Minnesota. They were pushed west into the Dakotas and a little bit into eastern Montana and Canada. And that's where they remain today, such as those that still survive. Anyway, you're going to see a video. One of your videos you're going to watch is by a young Lakota woman talking about being herself, which is cool. Anyway, so the Sioux Society before European contact, which much as I described, they were matrilineal, matriarchal, women had significant power, etc., etc. That all changed when the Euro-Americans came, and one, you got the disease, which creates an apocalypse, but the other thing is the Euro-Americans bring horses. And this changed everything. And maybe not for the reason you think. We often imagine that one of the reasons that Native Americans lost the struggle with white Europeans is because white people had horses and guns. Well, no, because 10 minutes after white people had horses and guns, the Indians had horses and guns, because they're not stupid. Also, guns in the 16 and 1700s weren't that great. Horses are a bigger deal. So for Sioux, it's not the introducing horses to the Sioux and a lot of the other tribal people, the Plains people, is not about making war. It's about hunting. So, next slide. Bison are big. I cannot tell you how big they are. That's not just a funny looking cow. One, cows are big. If you're not sure, go over to the Mount Sac farm and stand next to one. They're big. And now imagine the bison, they're twice that size. They're huge. That head alone is massive. That bison's he's probably 8 to 10 feet there at the shoulder. They're huge. They're muscular. They're fast. And then they've got sharp, pointy horns. They're cranky. That's not just one, cows can be dangerous, but cows have been domesticated. The bison is to cow what wolf is to dog. Okay? It's a huge animal. So the Sioux used to hunt them. But, next slide. For a single human being, or even, Joe and his homies, to go out and kill a bison was a significant act, and it was difficult. It was hard to do. Those are the same thing. Oh, peg. Redundancy. You got a bow and arrow, and you got a guy on foot, and you got a bison, which is huge, which is fast, which is angry. Probably no Indian in the history of the universe ran up that close to a bison, because it's a super good way to get killed by a bison. All he's got to do is hook that head over there to that guy's soft, squishy middle and tear out his guts. Oh no, I hate it when that happens. That would definitely leave a mark, right? Yeah. So before horses, bison hunting accounted for about 25% of the Sioux's calorie intake, just like all the other people, because it was easier to gather plants than it was to kill a bison. Yeah? But then, next slide. People showed up with horses, and the Sioux were like, what is that cool thing? And then they stole some horses, and then they had horses, and then they bred horses, etc., etc. And then some horses got wild on the plains, because they got out, and then you could catch horses, and there's horses and horses. And what happens is Sioux men figure out really quickly that the horse is a fabulous tool for killing bison. With a horse, you've got an animal that's every bit as fast as a bison, and now you really can run up alongside it, stab it or hit it with a bow and arrow, and then run away before it kills you. And if there's a few of you on horses, you can attack a bison, particularly one that's lagging behind, is older or weak or young. You can attack a bunch of you and take it down pretty quickly. And then you can do it again later that day, and again tomorrow, and again the next day, so that suddenly, with horses, Sioux men could kill a lot more bison. And what happens is, pretty quickly, in the early 1800s, the Sioux go from being a matriarchal, matrilineal culture where they're mostly gatherers eating the vegetable matter that women collect, and only occasionally some bison meat, to being a culture that exists almost entirely on bison and bison products, and makes its houses out of bisons, and makes its jewelry out of horns and bison teeth. That is a totally bison-centered culture, because suddenly bison are so much easier to kill, and they have so much. And what happens with that is, let's go to the next slide. Bison, they need more wives to process the bison, because the old Sioux division of labor was during the hunting season, and you hunted in the fall when a Sioux man might kill a bison, and then his wife and her friends would help butcher that bison, because you have to quickly. You can't just pop the bison in the refrigerator, because there isn't a refrigerator. Also, the bison's really big. You got not only just gut it and cut it down, but then you got to process all the meat so that it doesn't go bad. You're going to have to salt it. You're going to have to smoke it. You're going to have to dry it. You're going to have to do a bunch of stuff so that you've got food for the winter, right? So one wife could manage one man's kill, because he didn't kill that many bison. But when you've got Sioux dudes on horses who can kill 2-3 bison a day, multiple days in a row, suddenly, not only does that guy have a lot more cultural power because he's bringing in so much food, but he needs more wives to process all those dead bison. Oh no. So what happens, next slide, Sioux people go from being matriarchal and monogamous, that is, one spouse at a time, to being patriarchal and polygamous. That is, the power shifts from being female-centered to being male-centered, as men become the people who do the most important thing, kill bison. They then get to have multiple wives, and polygamous societies are always about men and multiple wives. They're never the other way around. And I don't care what they tell you on reality TV, polygamy is bad for women. It means that a man can literally own. Polygamy is always about owning and controlling women, and it's about how some men get to have more than their share of these very valuable pieces of property, women. So Sioux women go from being important and valuable in their culture to being not, to being chattel, to being second and third wives. And so it's not just that the apocalypse wipes out Native Americans. What happens is in culture, in lots of Native American cultures, the changes that take place in their cultures after the Euro-Americans show up are so big and so destabilizing, particularly in the wake of the apocalypse, the disease apocalypse, that what happens is Native American tribes shift the way they do things, often voluntarily, like the Sioux. Sometimes they're forced into it by Christian missionaries who are like, no, you can't organize your society that way, etc., etc. So that's bad. That's all bad. At least it's bad for women. It's good for men. I shouldn't be sexist. It's bad for women. It's bad for Indigenous women. It's bad for Euro-American women as patriarchy spreads to more and more people. So you don't have a matriarchy existing in North America to say, look, here's another way to do this. Yeah. Oh, gosh. There's nothing fun about that, is there? Yeah. Look at that old fart with those two young wives. Next slide. Oh, that's American progress. Yay. These are Sioux people protesting the pipeline up in South Dakota. American progress tends to be super destructive to everyone. Capitalism isn't good for most of us. Consumerism isn't good for most of us. Patriarchy is not good for most of us. I would argue that monotheistic patriarchal religions aren't good for a lot of us. They might be good for you, though. It's not good for me. And that's okay. I'm a liberal. You go ahead and do what you want to do. But fundamentally, for Native Americans, it's a before and after the Euro-Americans show up because you get the apocalypse. And that's shorter. That's the end of the second half of the lecture. Yay! That's all. We're done with that. So what you have to do now, you have to do your reading response if you haven't already done it, and you're going to do 2 video responses. And what I didn't want to leave you with the impression that Native Americans only exist in American history in the far distant past. So I got you a couple of videos of sort of what's going on with Native American women in the 20th century, as I thought that might be more interesting than sort of super old history stuff. So you have those 3 things to send me for week 2. You need to send me those sometime this week, that is before Sunday at midnight. Yeah? Good. Okay. And that's 2 weeks down, 13 weeks to go. And one of those weeks is Thanksgiving. So 12 weeks to go. It's going to go by really fast. So do not fall behind on your work. This happened last spring. We transitioned to online, and my students did really well for a few weeks. And then they let the apocalypse that we were experiencing, or at least the plague, and all of that, and the stress of that, and the non-discipline of being in the classroom kind of distract them. And about mid-semester, everybody kind of disappeared for a while. And then everybody got really behind. So I don't want that to happen to you. Keep working. You finished week 2. Send that stuff to me. Start week 3. Okay? Because this is college. You have goals. I want you to meet them. Yeah? Okay. Hey, I'll see you next week. Thanks a lot for riding along with this lecture. Take care of yourself. Spread the love.